So, Sundance Day 6 is over. I saw 2 movies today, and I was unfortunately disappointed by both. That's not to say that they were bad, just disappointing in one way or another. The first one was The World to Come, which is a movie that I was looking forward to. It looked like a pretty solid Portrait of a Lady on Fire-esque romance. And what I got was just a romance. A pretty basic romance that's elevated by really good filmmaking. The movie is gorgeous. It's shot really, really well. The sets are great. The costumes are great. The period aesthetics of this are great. The performances are great. But the story did very little for me, and the romance did very little for me. This is a movie that I think fails almost exclusively in its setup. The first act of this goes a long way into making the rest of this not work that well, because there doesn't feel like there's much pushing the story forward. In fact, there isn't anything pushing the story forward because there isn't really a story. The story is basically about somebody who is played by Katherine Waterston, working on a farm with her husband, played by Casey Affleck. Then one day, 2 more people happen to move in a farm very close by to them, played by Christopher Abbott and Vanessa Kirby. And then Vanessa Kirby and Katherine Waterston strike up a romance. That's the plot, and that's all the plot is, which is very unfortunate. In most romance movies, I tend to have a hard time getting into them because I do like a story, a structured story, and this just really doesn't have it. I mean, it hits beats that it's supposed to hit, third act low points, break into 2s, midpoints, that type of stuff it hits pretty well, but it doesn't feel like the story is actually progressing to those points. They just kind of feel like they happen, because the end of Act 1, typically, you want to have something happen, something big happen. And in this case, it would be Vanessa Kirby and Katherine Waterston striking up a romance. But there's nothing really compelling that. It just sort of happens. Vanessa Kirby just shows up one day, and then she comes to her house, and then they just kind of strike up a romance by talking in scene after scene after scene. It is pretty much just scene after scene of people talking with very little progression in characters or story. And the characters themselves don't feel like they grow either. The only character in this movie that I found even remotely interesting was Christopher Abbott, and that's because they initially treat him as just, the husband of Vanessa Kirby, and then you slowly learn throughout the movie that he's a bit of a sociopath. He's like a monster. And that was interesting. But that was the only character that was interesting. Casey Affleck just kind of is brooding the whole movie. Katherine Waterston is a intellectual. And then Vanessa Kirby is the romantic interest of Katherine Waterston. That's about all it is.
I don't know how to put it into words.
It's been my experience that it's not always those who show the least who actually feel the least.
There's no real sense of urgency to the story, and it makes everything feel like it's just horribly slow. But it does get interesting near the end. The last 20 minutes or so is the best this movie is because things start to happen, but it takes way too long to get there. It takes over an hour to get to anything that's interesting. So I guess see it at your own risk. It's a pretty slow movie. I wouldn't say that it's horrifically boring, but there are stretches where it just doesn't feel like there's upward movement to the story or the characters. It kind of gets to a point where things feel pretty static, and I didn't much care for that. So I'll give this one a 7. Again, it's very well made, it's very well performed, but it is just the story is just kind of bland to me. I didn't get a great sense of the relationship, I didn't get a great sense of any story, so Next up was a highly anticipated one, which was Prisoners of the Ghostland. This is a Nicolas Cage Sundance movie, which I had hopes to be the next Mandy, which would be a kind of trippy horror movie starring a crazy Nicolas Cage. Because despite the memes of Nicolas Cage overacting and whatnot, when you put him in the right role, he can work really well. And in this role, he actually does work pretty well. He's still hammy, he's still over the top, but that works for this movie. And that's really the only thing that works with this movie. The rest of it ranges between competent to over the top in a bad way, and then over the top sometimes in a good way. It's a very weird movie. It's basically Escape from New York, which is a movie about a guy who goes to rescue somebody from an apocalyptic area with explosive devices forcing him on the mission. And that's literally what this movie is too. But instead of the President of the United States, Nicolas Cage is going to save Sofia Boutella from, like, the afterlife or something. It's called Ghostland, which is a place that people just end up and they can't get out of it. And there's some kind of message about, like, nuclear waste or something. It's very strange. It's very weird. It's highly creative. I'll give it that. It's a bonkers movie. There's a lot of craziness in this. There's a lot of imagination in it. And there is some fun action here and there. But at times it just feels like the ideas got away from the director.
So the director originally was planning to film in Mexico because he was a big fan of spaghetti western.
Escape from New York is an incredibly simple movie. Almost too simple, honestly. A guy goes to a place to save a person and he encounters things, and that's the movie. And that's essentially this, but ratcheted up to 11. As Sofia Boutella, for some reason, loses her voice, so she has to get her voice back, which is a central plot point because Nicolas Cage has an armband that will recognize her voice and give him extra time before he explodes. So that's like a central plot point, but it like just kind of is there, and then 2 minutes later it's not there. It's very strange. There's a lot of moments like that, and the over-the-top nature of it just doesn't really work all that well. It's very strange. It seems to be going for like an intentionally over the top movie to the point where everything just kind of is cringy. There are so many moments where people are overacting to such a degree that it was uncomfortable. It wasn't funny. Where Nicolas Cage is overacting and just looks like he has a good time, people seem to just be overacting. And it's just like, ugh. This is a movie without characters, and it has such a simple plot that there just really isn't that much to latch onto. Nicolas Cage is Snake Plissken. Sofia Boutella is the girl that needs to be saved. It's incredibly reductive, and it just doesn't really work.
The main character, Nicolas Cage, he's fighting the time. He has a very limited time to survive. And also the governor, he's also fighting his own sense of time. He thinks like tick tock, tick tock. And also the people that lives in Ghostland, they're trying really hard not to move the clock tower. So he, for this movie, the time was a really important essence.
But overall, it's just kind of this weird thing that feels like it would have been a VOD straight to voodoo type of thing if it weren't for some creativity, imagination, and visuals. Oh, my camera died. Well, I guess that ends day 6. See you tomorrow for the awards. Bye-bye.